There are days when peace is just a fragile veneer, a thin covering over a restless undercurrent waiting to erupt. And on that particular day, in the coastal city of Oakhaven, Georgia, a festival that seemed isluceat joy was, unknowingly, the prelude to a storm. A storm that would shake the very foundations of what people believed justice to be. Oakhaven's annual Heritage Festival was in full swing, a much-anticipated event celebrating cultural diversity and the history of the fight for equality. The air vibrated with lively music, laughter, and the enticing aroma of street food. Flags palavras, traditional dances unfolded, and stalls displayed handcrafted goods. On the surface, it was a perfect picture of unity and pride. But if you listened closely, you could feel other pulses, a simmering tension about race and fairness that still wove its way through the city's historic streets, like a hidden crack in its ancient heart. And perhaps no one felt that more acutely than Anya Sharma, 32 years old, a young South Asian lawyer with bright eyes and a quiet determination hidden beneath an elegant demeanor. Anya wasn't from Oakhaven. She had moved there Chund months prior, carrying a silent but incredibly important mission. She was covertly investigating a disturbing series of allegations of misconduct and systemic discrimination within the local police department itself. It was a job that demanded discretion, subtlety, and no small amount of courage. Today, Anya blended into the festival crowd, not for a holiday, but to observe, to listen, to feel the true pulse of this city, the pulse hidden behind the smiles and the music. She wore a modern áo dai, a traditional Vietnamese dress in a striking jade green, its soft silk fabric swaying gently with her every step. It wasn't just a fashion choice, but a quiet tribute to her heritage, and also, unintentionally, a touch of difference, a subtle, eye-catching detail in the stream of people. She moved with a gentle grace, her eyes missing nothing, trying to piece together the fragments of a complex puzzle. And then, her gaze met another. Officer Dale Harding, around 45, a white man with a perpetually stern face and cold, assessing eyes. Harding was the embodiment of the old guard, those who felt their power and status challenged by societal shifts, by the rising tide of minority voices. To him, this multicultural festival, with its messages of equality and inclusion, was nothing more than an irksome concession, a disruption to the order he so desperately wanted to maintain. He'd grown up in a world where things seemed set in stone, where roles and places were clearly defined. And now, the walls of that world were trembling, threatening to crumble, and it made him uncomfortable, even angry. He stood there, arms crossed, like a rugged stone statue out of place amidst the shared joy. It was then that Harding noticed Anya. His eyes fixated on her. Not because she was doing anything wrong, not because she was causing any disturbance, but simply because of her presence. A woman of color, exuding a confidence that radiated from her posture, from her intelligent and calm gaze. Someone who didn't belong here, according to his narrow, prejudiced view. A toxic thought, like a small serpent, began to slither through Harding's mind. What's she doing here? Another outsider datang to stir up trouble, to try and tear down what we've built? He didn't know who she was, didn't know her purpose, but prejudice had already clouded his judgment, painting a negative scenario in his head. It wasn't because she did anything wrong, but simply because she was who she was, a vibrant dot of color on a canvas he wished to keep in its old, monotonous hues. The smoldering embers of suspicion and resentment began to ignite within Dale Harding, a small flame yet powerful enough to consume an entire festival, and perhaps his own career. Wrong decisions, unnecessary tragedies, often begin with such a skewed glance, with such a prejudiced thought. Prejudice, you see, is like a pair of fogged-up glasses. Wear them long enough, and you forget what the world, in all its diversity and beauty, truly looks like. And Dale Harding had been wearing those glasses for far too long. Anya felt Harding's gaze on her. It was a familiar unease, a prickly sensation on the back of her neck that many people of color in America had experienced far too often. That look, she thought, a knot tightening in her stomach. It's not curiosity. It's judgment. She tried to ignore it, to continue her observation of the vibrant crowd, the lively music, the children laughing as they chased pigeons in the square. But the weight of his stare was palpable, a silent accusation hanging in the festive air. She adjusted the strap of her small leather bag, a subtle movement, but her senses were on high alert. This wasn't the first time she'd felt that kind of scrutiny, that unwarranted attention that made her feel like an outsider in her own country. But today something felt different, more charged, more dangerous. Harding, fueled by his ingrained prejudice and a simmering resentment, made his decision. He was going to check her out. He keyed his radio, his voice a low growl. "Dispatch, this is Harding, Unit 7. Got a possible suspicious individual, vicinity of the fountain. Female, appears Asian, unusual attire, seems to be casing the area." He deliberately used vague, loaded language, planting seeds of suspicion where none should exist. He was using his authority, the power of his badge and his radio, to legitimize his personal bias. It was a classic, insidious move, one that played out in countless unfortunate encounters across the nation. His younger partner, Officer Miller, a fresh-faced officer who still possessed a semblance of idealism, glanced Podrostkovum at Anya, then back at Harding, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Just looks like someone enjoying the festival, Dale," Miller ventured, his voice hesitant. "You sure about this?" He'd seen Harding go off on tangents before, letting his personal feelings cloud his professional judgment, but usually not this overtly, not in the middle of a crowded public event. Harding, however, dismissed Miller's concern with a curt wave of his hand. "Trust my gut on this one, kid," he grunted, his eyes never leaving Anya. "Been doing this job a lot longer than you. You learn to spot the ones who don't belong." His gut, of course, was nothing more than a cocktail of prejudice and a misplaced sense of superiority. He believed he had a special insight, an ability to see threats where others saw none. In reality, he was seeing only what he wanted to see, what confirmed his a priori biases. The Keech TNH began to build, a slow, tightening coil of tension. Harding started to move towards Anya. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one heavy with unspoken intent. Anya felt it, a shift in the energy around her. The joyful sounds of the festival seemed to fade slightly, replaced by a more ominous thrum. She knew that walk. It was the walk of someone who had already made up their mind, someone who wasn't approaching to ask a question, but to assert dominance. She knew what was coming, she thought, her heart rate quickening despite her efforts to remain calm. The same old script. But this time, something told her it wouldn't end the usual way. She took a discreet, calming breath, her legal training kicking in, preparing her for the inevitable confrontation. She wouldn't be a passive victim. She wouldn't let him intimidate her. As Harding closed the distance, the crowd Wakrug Anya seemed to part slightly, an unconscious reaction to the palpable shift in atmosphere. A few curious onlookers paused, their smiles fading, sensing that something was amiss. The air, just moments before filled with laughter and music, now felt thick with an unspoken apprehension. The vibrant colors of the festival suddenly seemed a little less bright. It was a stark reminder of how quickly a moment of joy could be overshadowed by the specter of prejudice, how easily the power vested in a uniform could be twisted and misused. The stage was set, not for a celebration of heritage, but for a confrontation, a clash between ingrained bias and a quiet, determined fight for dignity. And Anya Sharma, unknowingly, was about to become the unwilling protagonist in a drama that would send ripples far beyond the confines of Oakhaven's festive square. Harding reached Anya, his shadow falling over her, a physical manifestation of the unease he'd cast. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low, deliberate rumble. "I'm going to need you to stop right there." The words were an order, not a request, delivered with an air of unquestionable authority. Though his tone was outwardly civil, a carefully constructed facade for any potential onlookers, there was an undercurrent of menace, a barely veiled hostility that Anya recognized instantly. It was the kind of tone designed to intimidate, to make a person feel small and powerless. Anya turned slowly, her movements measured and composed, facing him directly. Her heart was pounding, a frantic drum against her ribs, but her expression remained calm, her gaze steady. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice even, professional, betraying none of the apprehension churning within her. She was acutely aware of the growing number of eyes on them now, a small crowd beginning to gather, drawn by the unfolding drama. She knew the importance of witnesses, the silent power of a watching crowd. Harding's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at her composure. He'd expected a more deferential, perhaps even fearful response. "I need to see some identification, ma'am," he stated, his voice a little firmer this time. He then added, almost as an afterthought, a classic catch-all excuse: "You fit the description of an individual we're looking for." It was a blatant lie, a fabrication designed to give his actions a veneer of legitimacy. There was no such individual. The only description he was operating on was the one manufactured by his own prejudice. Anya didn't flinch. She knew her rights. "Officer," she replied, her tone still polite but firm, her legal training evident in every carefully chosen word. "I'm not legally obligated to provide identification unless I'm suspected of a specific crime. Could you please tell me what crime I'm suspected of committing?" She wasn't being difficult. She was asserting her constitutional rights, the very rights that officers like Harding were sworn to uphold. She knew that in situations like this, knowledge was power, and she intended to use every ounce of it. The Keech-Tienge ratcheted up another notch. Harding's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being questioned, especially not by someone he perceived as an outsider, someone he felt should simply comply. Her calm, articulate response was a direct challenge to his authority, and it clearly irked him. He felt his control slipping, his carefully constructed scenario beginning to unravel. "Don't you get smart with me, lady," he snapped, his voice losing its veneer of civility, a raw edge of aggression seeping through. "Just do as I say." He was trying to reassert his dominance, to put her back in her place through intimidation. The crowd murmured, a low, collective hum of unease. A few more cell phones were discreetly raised, their small lenses silently recording the encounter. The digital eyes of the 21st century were now fixed on Officer Dale Harding, capturing his every word, his every move. He was no longer just an officer interacting with a citizen. He was an actor on a very public stage, and his performance was being documented for the world to see. And Anya Sharma, despite the fear that was now a cold knot in her stomach, refused to break character. She stood her ground, a solitary figure of defiance against a tide of unwarranted aggression. Harding, visibly incensed by Anya's unwavering composure and her articulate assertion of her rights, decided to escalate. His frustration was a palpable force, radiating off him in waves. He'd expected submission, not a well-reasoned legal argument. "I have reason to believe you may be carrying contraband, ma'am," he declared, his voice louder now, tinged with a false sense of authority. It was another baseless accusation, a desperate attempt to find a pretext for further action, to justify the unwarranted stop. He was digging himself deeper into a hole of his own making, but his ego, his ingrained belief in his own infallibility, wouldn't let him back down. Anya's breath hitched, but she held his gaze. "Officer, you have no probable cause to search me or my belongings," she stated clearly, her voice resonating with a conviction that belied the tremor in her hands. She then did something unexpected, something bold. She held up her small, elegant handbag, not in a gesture of surrender but in a gesture of defiance, turning slightly, so the onlookers and their recording phones had a clear view. "Everyone, please look," she called out, her voice rising above the ambient noise of the festival. "I have done nothing wrong. This officer is harassing me without any justification." The Keech-Tienge surged. Harding, his face now a mask of fury and embarrassment at being so publicly challenged, lunged forward. With a swift, aggressive movement, he snatched the handbag from Anya's grasp. The abruptness of the action, The sheer violation of it sent a ripple of gasps and murmurs through the now attentive crowd. He didn't ask. He took. He then, with a contemptuous flourish, upended the bag, its contents spilling onto the dusty ground at their feet. A smartphone, a slim wallet, a small leather-bound notebook, a tube of lip balm, a pen. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. Just the ordinary, everyday items of a professional woman. Harding stared at the scattered items, his face flushing a deeper shade of crimson. The public exposure of his baseless accusation, the undeniable proof that his suspicions were unfounded, only seemed to fuel his rage. Instead of de-escalating, instead of admitting his mistake, he doubled down. His pride, his deeply ingrained sense of authority, couldn't tolerate being proven wrong, especially not in front of a crowd, especially not by a woman of color who dared to question him. He reached out and grabbed Anya's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, bruising. "You're resisting an officer," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to shift the blame, to paint her as the aggressor. Anya winced in pain as his fingers dug into her skin, but she didn't try to pull away violently. That would only play into his hands, give him the excuse he was so clearly seeking. Instead, she used her voice, her most potent weapon. "Let go of me," she cried out, her voice sharp and clear, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear. "You are hurting me. What is your badge number, officer? I demand to know your badge number." She wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to the crowd, to the recording cameras, to anyone who might be listening, documenting every moment of this escalating abuse of power. Her words, laced with a mixture of pain and righteous indignation, hung heavy in the air, a stark indictment of Officer Harding's reckless and unwarranted actions. The festival's joyful atmosphere had now completely evaporated, replaced by a chilling tableau of injustice unfolding in broad daylight. Harding, now completely consumed by a blinding rage and a desperate need to reassert his shattered authority, made a move that would irrevocably seal his fate. He yanked hard on Anya's arm, twisting it, and with his other hand, he grabbed the shoulder of her elegant Audai. There was a sickening tearing sound loud in the sudden hush that had fallen over the immediate vicinity. The jade-green silk, a symbol of her heritage and her composure, ripped open, exposing her shoulder and a portion of her upper arm to the humid Georgia air and the stunned, horrified gazes of the onlookers. It was a deliberate act of humiliation, a violent, public stripping away of her dignity. The fabric, once a beautiful expression of culture, now hung in tatters, a testament to his uncontrolled aggression. A collective gasp, louder this time, rippled through the crowd. Then the shock gave way to outrage. "What in God's name are you doing, man?" a voice shouted from the edge of the growing circle. "That's assault," another cried out, the words laced with fury. Cell phone cameras, no longer discreet, were now held high, their lenses a phalanx of silent, unblinking witnesses, capturing every damning detail. A few brave individuals started to move forward, their faces etched with anger and disbelief, a protective instinct kicking in. They might not have known Anya, but they knew injustice when they saw it. The Kichtin reached its absolute peak, a deafening crescendo of raw emotion. Just as the crowd seemed poised to surge forward, a powerful, authoritative voice cut through the chaos, a voice accustomed to commanding attention. "Stop this at once, Officer Harding," the words boomed across the square. "Do you have any idea who you are assaulting?" Harding froze, his hand still clutching the torn fabric of Anya's dress. The unexpected intervention, the sheer force of the voice, momentarily pierced through his rage-fueled haze. He looked up, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, searching for the source of the command. It was Professor Ben Carter, a distinguished African-American historian, a revered figure in Oakhaven, and a stalwart of the civil rights movement in the region. He was a man whose very presence exuded integrity and moral authority. Anya had, in fact, confidentially consulted with him in the initial stages of her investigation into the Oakhaven PD. He strode forward now, his expression a mixture of profound disappointment and righteous anger, parting the crowd like a ship cutting through water. Harding visibly faltered. The sudden appearance of Professor Carter, a man whose reputation was unassailable in this city, was a development he hadn't anticipated. And then came the true turning point, the revelation that would shatter Harding's world. Anya, despite the raw, stinging pain in her arm and the burning shame of her public humiliation, straightened her shoulders. Her torn dye was a badge of dishonor for her attacker, not for her. She took a deep, steadying breath. She looked directly at Harding. Her eyes, though perhaps glistening with unshed tears, were filled with an unyielding fire. Then, she turned her gaze to the crowd, to the cameras, to Professor Carter. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a whisper of defeat, but a clarion call of truth, ringing out clear and strong, each word meticulously enunciated. "My name," she declared, her voice unwavering, "is Anya Sharma. I am an attorney with the United States Department of Justice. I have been assigned to lead the federal investigation into systemic corruption and misconduct within the Oakhaven Police Department." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, then delivered the final, devastating blow. "And Officer Harding," she said, her gaze locking onto his, "you have just assaulted a federal officer in the performance of her duties." A stunned silence descended upon the square, so profound it was as if the entire festival had collectively held its breath. Then the silence exploded. Not into cheers, not immediately, but into a cacophony of gasps, exclamations of disbelief, and a low, rumbling murmur that quickly grew into an uproar. Officer Dale Harding's face, already flushed with anger, drained of all color, leaving him a ghastly, pale white. He stared at Anya as if he'd seen a ghost. The full, terrifying implication of his actions, of who he had just assaulted in front of hundreds of witnesses and a legion of recording devices, crashed down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. He had not just crossed a line, he had leaped headfirst into an abyss. Harding stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no coherent words emerged. The bravado, the aggression, the unshakable self-assurance he'd displayed just moments before had evaporated, leaving behind a man visibly shaken, his eyes darting around wildly, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He looked from Anya's resolute face to the stern, condemning visage of Professor Carter, then to the sea of shocked and angry faces in the crowd. The world he thought he controlled had just imploded. Just then, another figure pushed through the throng, her presence commanding immediate attention. It was Congresswoman Eleanor Vance, a progressive politician renowned for her staunch stance against police corruption and a vocal advocate for systemic reform. She too had been attending the festival, and, alerted by Professor Carter, had witnessed the final, horrifying moments of Harding's assault on Anya. Her expression was one of cold fury. "Officer Harding," Congresswoman Vance declared, her voice sharp and carrying clearly over the din, "your actions today are a disgrace to your badge and an affront to the people of Oakhaven. I can confirm that Ms. Anya Sharma is indeed a lead investigator with the Department of Justice. What we have all witnessed here is an egregious abuse of power." Her words, delivered with the weight of her office, acted as another nail in Harding's rapidly sealing coffin. Officer Miller, Harding's younger partner who had stood by, increasingly uncomfortable but ultimately silent during the escalation, now looked utterly aghast. He took a noticeable step back from Harding, physically distancing himself from the man who had just self-destructed in the most public and spectacular fashion imaginable. Miller's face was pale, a mixture of fear and dawning realization of the trouble his partner, and by association, perhaps even he, was now in. The Keechtin continued its relentless unfolding. Harding, in a last desperate and utterly futile attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his own making, finally found his voice, though it was now laced with a pathetic, whining tone. She set me up," he blurted out, pointing a trembling finger at Anya. "This is a setup. She's an agitator trying to destroy this department. She provoked me." It was a weak, transparent lie, the last resort of a cornered bully trying to deflect blame. Anya met his desperate accusation with a look of calm disdain. "Truth doesn't require a setup, officer," she responded, her voice steady, cutting through his bluster. "Your actions today, every single one of them, speak for themselves. My credentials, my assignment, my entire professional record are matters of public information, easily verifiable." She paused, then added with a steely edge, "You, on the other hand, Officer Harding, what have you been doing behind closed doors? What truths have you been trying to conceal?" Her words hung in the air, a direct challenge, a hint at the deeper rot she was in Oakhaven to uncover. As if on cue, two more uniformed officers appeared, their expressions grim, their badges identifying them as members of the Oakhaven Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. They had clearly been alerted to the escalating situation and had arrived in time to witness Harding's final, damning outburst and Anya's powerful rebuttal. They exchanged a brief, knowing glance. The festival, which had begun with such promise of celebration, had now become the stage for a dramatic and public unmasking of corruption and abuse, right in the heart of the city. The carefully constructed facade of law and order, at least as personified by Officer Dale Harding, had crumbled into dust. The internal affairs officers approached Harding, their movements deliberate, their faces impassive but conveying a sense of grim duty. One of them, a tall, stern-looking captain, addressed Harding directly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Officer Harding, you're to come with us." It wasn't a request. As the cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut around Harding's wrists, a sound that echoed unnaturally in the suddenly charged silence of the square, the crowd erupted, not in anger this time, but in a wave of raw, exultant cheers and applause. It was a visceral, spontaneous outpouring of relief and a sense of vindication, as if a collective weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The sight of a uniformed officer who had so blatantly abused his power, being held accountable in such a public manner, was a catharsis many had longed to witness but perhaps never truly expected to see. Anya stood there, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, her breathing shallow but controlled. The torn fabric of her iodie was a stark, painful reminder of the assault, yet in this moment it also felt like a battle scar, a testament to her resilience. Professor Carter moved to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity and profound respect. Congresswoman Vance stood with them, her expression a mixture of satisfaction at this immediate consequence and a steely resolve for the fight that lay ahead. The three of them, an unlikely trio forged in the crucible of this public confrontation, represented a powerful alliance of justice, community, and political will. As Harding was led away, his head bowed, the cheers from the crowd followed him like a judgment. Then, all eyes turned back to Anya. The cameras were still rolling, the phones still held high, but the energy had shifted. There was an expectation in the air, a hunger for more than just the arrest of one rogue officer. They wanted to hear from her, the woman who had stood her ground, the woman who had, in a matter of minutes, become a symbol of defiance and hope. Anya took a moment, composing herself, then stepped forward, her voice, though perhaps a little shaky at first, gaining strength with each word. "What happened here today," she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd, "is not just about me. It's about all of us. It's about the right to live in a community where every single person's dignity is respected, regardless of their color, regardless of their background, regardless of where they come from." A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. "This officer's actions," she continued, her voice growing firmer, "are a symptom of a deeper problem, a problem we can no longer afford to ignore. For too long, the voices of those who have suffered injustice at the hands of those sworn to protect them have been silenced, dismissed, or disbelieved." She gestured towards the path Harding had been led down. "Today, we saw what happens when that power goes unchecked. But today we also saw what happens when a community stands together, when witnesses refuse to look away, when truth is given a platform." The Keach wasn't over. It was merely transforming. Professor Carter then stepped forward, his voice rich with the timbre of decades spent advocating for civil rights, resonating through the square. "This arrest is a start," he declared, "but it is only a start. We cannot allow this moment to be a fleeting headline. We must demand real systemic change. We must demand accountability not just from one officer, but from the entire system that allowed his behavior to fester." Congresswoman Vance echoed his call, her voice sharp and impassioned. "I will be calling for an immediate independent investigation into the Oakhaven Police Department, an investigation with full transparency and community oversight," she announced, to another roar of approval. "And I will stand with Ms. Sharma, I will stand with Professor Carter, and I will stand with all of you to ensure that what happened here today becomes a catalyst for lasting reform." Then, Professor Carter raised his hand, a spontaneous idea igniting in his eyes. "Friends, neighbors, fellow citizens of Oakhaven," he called out, "let us not disperse. Let us not go home and simply talk about what we saw. Let us take this energy, this outrage, this hope, and let us march. Let us march to City Hall right now, and let our voices be heard where it matters most." The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. A deafening cheer went up. People began to move, to organize themselves, a spontaneous, powerful surge of humanity. Chants began to rise. "No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace." Anya, flanked by Professor Carter and Congresswoman Vance, found herself at the head of an impromptu procession. Hundreds, then what seemed like thousands, fell in behind them. The festive banners of the Heritage Festival now mingled with hastily made signs scrawled with demands for justice. The music of the festival had been replaced by the rhythmic cadence of marching feet, and the unified cry of a community awakened a community that had found its voice in the courageous stand of one woman and the egregious actions of one officer. The roar of the people was no longer just a sound, it was a force. The impromptu procession, a river of determined faces and resonant voices, flowed through the streets of Oakhaven, gathering momentum with every block. Onlookers emerged from shops and homes, some joining the march spontaneously, others raising fists in solidarity. The energy was electric, a potent mix of righteous anger, newfound hope, and an unshakable sense of shared purpose. Anya walked at the forefront, no longer just a DOJ attorney on a covert assignment, but an accidental leader, a symbol of the very justice she was in Oakhaven to pursue. The torn silk of her iodie, once a mark of humiliation, now seemed like a banner, a testament to the battle she had just faced and, in a significant way, won. Professor Carter walked beside her, his steps steady, his presence a grounding force. Congresswoman Vance, on her other side, occasionally raised a hand, acknowledging the supportive shouts from the sidelines, her political acumen now fully engaged in channeling this raw public energy towards a tangible goal. They reached Oakhaven City Hall, its imposing stone facade a symbol of the very authority they were there to challenge. The wide steps leading up to the main entrance quickly filled with marchers, a human wave spilling onto the plaza below. Chants of "justice now" and "accountability" echoed off the building, a powerful demand that could not be ignored. Security guards, initially flustered, quickly realized the futility of trying to disperse such a determined and sizable crowd. This was not a riot. It was a deeply felt, organized expression of civic will. After a tense standoff that lasted perhaps 20 minutes filled with more chanting and impassioned speeches from various community members, who spontaneously took turns addressing the crowd with a borrowed megaphone, the heavy main doors of City Hall creaked open. A delegation of city officials, looking harried and clearly unprepared for such a direct and public confrontation, emerged onto the top steps. Among them were the city manager, the chief of police, a man whose department was now under an intense, unwelcome spotlight, and a senior aide to the mayor. The Keech TINH reached a new, more strategic phase. Anya, with Professor Carter and Congresswoman Vance by her side, ascended the steps to meet them, the crowd falling into a respectful, expectant silence. This was no longer just about Officer Harding. This was about the system that had enabled him, the culture that had tolerated him. The city manager began to speak, offering platitudes about a thorough investigation into the unfortunate incident. But Anya, her voice calm yet unyielding, cut him off. "With all due respect, sir," she stated, her words amplified by the megaphone. "This was not merely an unfortunate incident. It was a blatant abuse of power, a symptom of a systemic rot that many in this city have endured for far too long. We are not here for promises of an internal review. We are here for substantive change." She then, with a lawyer's precision, began to lay out not only the details of her own assault, but also, in broad strokes, some of the patterns of misconduct and discriminatory practices her preliminary investigation had already begun to uncover within the Oakhaven PD. She spoke of uninvestigated citizen complaints, of disproportionate arrest rates in minority neighborhoods, of a pervasive blue wall of silence that protected problem officers. Professor Carter followed, his historical perspective lending gravitas to Anya's legal arguments, reminding the officials of Oakhaven's long and often painful journey towards racial justice, a journey that was clearly far from over. Congresswoman Vance then delivered a powerful political ultimatum, warning that federal oversight and funding could be at stake if meaningful reforms were not immediately forthcoming. One by one, other members of the community, emboldened by Anya's courage and the presence of their leaders, stepped forward. Mothers spoke of sons harassed, fathers of daughters disrespected, young people of being profiled and intimidated. Their personal stories, raw and painful, painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a police department that had, for too many, become a source of fear rather than safety. The city officials, visibly uncomfortable, listened, their initial defensiveness slowly giving way to a dawning, or perhaps feigned, understanding of the depth of the community's anger and mistrust. Under the relentless pressure of the crowd, the damning testimonies, and the unwavering resolve of Anya, Professor Carter, and Congresswoman Vance, the city officials had no choice but to concede. After a tense public negotiation right there on the steps of City Hall, they reluctantly agreed to several key demands. An immediate, independent, and externally led investigation into Officer Harding's conduct and the broader issues within the Oakhaven PD. The prompt establishment of a citizen-led police oversight board with genuine subpoena power and disciplinary authority, and a commitment to a transparent review and revision of the department's use of force policies and anti-bias training programs. As these commitments were announced to the cheering crowd, a fragile sense of victory settled over the plaza. It wasn't the end of the struggle, everyone knew that, but it was a significant, hard-won beginning. 1 year later, Oakhaven was in many ways a changed city. Officer Dale Harding had been convicted of assault and official misconduct and was serving a prison sentence, his law enforcement career over in disgrace. The independent investigation had led to disciplinary actions against several other officers and had initiated a slow but steady process of internal reform within the Oakhaven PD. The Citizens Police Oversight Board, with Anya Sharma serving as its chief legal counsel in a pro bono capacity, was actively reviewing cases and pushing for greater accountability. The annual Heritage Festival that year felt different. There was still music and laughter, but beneath it all, there was a new sense of empowerment, a shared understanding that the fight for justice, though arduous, was not futile. The theme of the festival was Echoes of Justice, a direct nod to the events that had unfolded a year prior. And when Anya Sharma took the stage not as a silent observer this time but as an honored guest and a recognized community leader, the applause was thunderous. The dawn of change, once a distant hope, had begun to break over Oakhaven. The Oakhaven Heritage Festival 1 year on felt imbued with a new spirit. The vibrant colors seemed brighter, the music more resonant, the laughter of children echoing with a lighter, freer tone. The city, on its surface, might have appeared much the same. The historic architecture still stood proud. The salty breeze still swept in from the Atlantic. But something fundamental had shifted in its soul. People walked a little taller, their eyes meeting with a newfound sense of shared understanding and mutual respect. The fear, the simmering resentment that had once been an unspoken undercurrent, had begun to recede, replaced by a cautious but palpable optimism. The story of Anya Sharma and Officer Dale Harding had become a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered in barbershops and discussed over dinner tables, a stark reminder of both the depths of injustice and the heights of collective courage. Anya stood on the main stage, the same stage where, just a year ago, she had been a silent, observant lawyer on a mission. Today, she was a recognized leader, a catalyst for change, the official civil rights counsel for the city of Oakhaven, a position created in the wake of the previous year's upheaval. The crowd before her was vast, a sea of faces reflecting the city's rich diversity. They hadn't forgotten that day. They hadn't forgotten her courage or the ugliness she had faced down. They hadn't forgotten the power they had discovered within themselves when they marched on City Hall. Her voice, when she spoke into the microphone, was no longer the slightly hesitant tone of an outsider, but the clear, confident voice of someone who belonged, someone who had earned her place. 1 year ago, she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled thousands. Many of us stood together in this very square, not in celebration, but in protest. We witnessed an act of injustice, and we refused to let it stand. We marched. We spoke. We demanded change. A roar of affirmation went up from the crowd. The journey since then has not been easy, Anya continued, her honesty resonating with her audience. Reform is not a single event. It's a relentless process. There have been setbacks. There has been resistance. But because of your voices, because of your unwavering commitment, Oakhaven is slowly, steadily, becoming a more just city. The work of the Citizens Oversight Board, your board, is making a difference. Accountability is no longer just a word, it's becoming a reality. She spoke not of personal triumph, but of collective responsibility. She reminded them that the fight for justice is never truly won, that it requires constant vigilance, unwavering courage, and an unyielding belief in the power of ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things. She spoke of the young people in the crowd, urging them to find their voices, to challenge injustice wherever they saw it, to carry the torch forward. The echoes of what happened here, she said, her voice filled with emotion, continue to resonate, not just in Oakhaven but far beyond. They remind us that one person's courage can ignite a movement. They remind us that a community united can move mountains. They remind us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, if we are willing to bend it. As she concluded her speech, the applause was deafening, a sustained ovation that seemed to shake the very ground. Professor Carter stood to one side, a proud, knowing smile on his face. Congresswoman Vance, who had flown in for the event, nodded in appreciation, a silent acknowledgement of the profound impact of that single, fateful day. Later, as the festival began to wind down, Anya found herself drawn back to the fountain, the very spot where Officer Harding had assaulted her. The stone was cool beneath her fingertips. The water still gurgled and splashed, a timeless, indifferent sound. But everything else had changed. She had changed. The city had changed. The story of Anya Sharma and Oakhaven is more than just a tale of one corrupt cop and one brave lawyer. It's a testament to the enduring power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the extraordinary things that can happen when people refuse to be silenced. It teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. It reminds us that your voice, your story, your presence, they matter more than you can possibly imagine. The world might seem like it's heard enough, seen enough, but there's always someone who needs to hear your truth again, someone who needs to see you stand up. Because when you do, you're not just fighting for yourself, you're lighting a path for others to follow. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked something within you, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this message. Because every voice amplified, every story shared, brings us one step closer to a more just world. Thank you for listening, for bearing witness. Remember, the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. And sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't the ones who openly declare their hatred, but the ones who smile to your face while quietly sharpening the knife.